So, Dollightful had a big tropical-themed collab with literally everyone. Last year. And I made a doll. Last year. I even shot video footage. Last year. Are you seeing a trend? I finally edited the footage, so please enjoy this very late face-up. This was my original concept art. I wanted her to look like the beach, and she sort of ended up somewhere between Katara from Avatar and Moana. I ended up changing things along the way, but this was the jumping off point. I started with this Cleo deNile, kept the clothes for patterns, and then cut off the hair. I also cut the back of her head open with a scalpel to make removing the old glue plugs easier, since I'm gonna make a wig for her instead of a reroot. It's a little gross. Let's fast forward. I glued the back of her head back on with Gorilla Glue, but this ended up failing later, so I sewed it shut eventually. For clothes, I'm using burlap fabric for her outfit. I measured the length of the skirt that I want and cut a piece. A trick to cutting burlap is to decide where you want to cut it, and then to snip one single strand of the burlap, pull it out to make an open sort of channel, and then carefully cut along that row. It'll help things stay neat and have less fraying in the long run. I used the bound edge of the fabric as the bottom on the tiers of the skirt as well as her top, so I don't need to worry about the material actually fraying in those areas. For embellishment, I found this faux baby's breath at the craft store with plastic buds that I pulled off and were just the right size to be large flowers for a doll. I pulled off several and then got some green embroidery floss to imitate greenery or maybe faux grass in 2 colors for a little variation. Threading the needle with a couple strands of each color, I tied a knot and cut it off to make a sort of burst of green. Then I sewed a flower and alternated doing that along the tiers of the skirt. I made little hanging garlands from tiny blue square beads and draped them along the flowers. For the bottom tier, instead of these drapes, I made loops of embroidery floss, glued them on the bottom edge with Gorilla Glue, and then cut the bottoms off the loops so they look like frayed grass or fringe. Once dry, I added a band of small pearl beads with a needle and thread, and eventually a skull bead in the very center. I created a waistband with a crotch strap to keep the skirt in place with a snap closure, and then all I had to do was sew the front and back of the skirt to it. I wanted her to have a staff, and at first I had a bunch of sticks from my backyard that had the sort of forked aesthetic I was looking for, so I could place a gem or flower or something in the center. But I realized quickly that this wasn't going to work out, so I clearly just had to make my own. So with that decided, I took a wooden skewer and cut it to the length I wanted the hand grip to be before gluing wire into the basic shape I was after instead. I filled in the bulk of the shape with the 2-part Apoxie Sculpt, first bulking up the bends in the staff where there was only exposed wire, before moving to the Skewer as well with a thinner layer. Once it was semi-cured, I started scratching grain lines into the fake bark with the edge of a paperclip. And then, once fully cured, I deepened the lines and tried to make them more jagged and uneven with my Dremel tool. After that, it got a watery black base coat to fill in the crevices before layers of brown dry brushing in a medium brown, a lighter brown, and then like an almost ashy color at the very driest. Now, I have lots of options for the charms I want hanging off the staff. So I choose a few beads. I wanted a feather as well, but they don't make feathers that are doll size, at least not that I've ever found. So I took some craft feathers I had and snipped them down to tiny size, and then used the one that I thought looked the best. In my original art, I had a thicker leather strap like this, but I really didn't like how it ended up looking after I glued it on, so I ended up ripping it off and using a much thinner linen cord. For her second accessory, the bag, I had this pink rope textured bag from a doll lot off eBay. It reminded me of Ariel's shell gathering satchel from The Little Mermaid, so I thought it was appropriate. First, I mixed some acrylic paint, yellow and purple and white to make a sort of tannish brown color, and then I added a little bit of metallic gold to give it some shine. The end result was a shimmery sort of brown, which I used to coat the entire bag inside and out so there was no pink showing. Once it was dry, I sealed it with DuraClear matte varnish. I then cut a piece of burlap to put inside the bag to fill it in, and next I wanted to cover up the Monster High logo. So I looked through my beads for some options, of which there were many, and I eventually settled on this large blue glass bead with a swirl in it that reminded me of Moana, so more Disney princess, yay. After some off-screen trial and error, I came up with this design, sewing on some beads and more green embroidery floss fringe. As for the hair, I made a wig out of 1/4-inch elastic, stretchy mesh, and some black Brazilian weave. If I do use this weave again though, I think I will cut the wefts off and just use the free hair because the wefts were really thick and hard to work with at such a small scale. And now all that's left is the face up. After blushing with my Rembrandt soft pastels, I blocked in her brows and darkened her lips. Originally my plan was to give her sort of tribal looking body tattoos, but I didn't like how they started turning out, so I scrapped that whole plan and just forgot it. After sealing with some Mr.Super clear matte, I defined her lips with black Prismacolor watercolored pencils and started drawing in her eyes. Watered down white acrylic paint in layers defined the whites of her eyes, and then I used some Pearl-X powders on her lips to make them sort of iridescent blue and purple. I ended up going with sunset colored eyeshadow in a gradient instead of the original fishtail shape I had in my concept art, because it kept looking like a koi fish tail instead of a tropical clownfish, which is what I was going for originally, and I just couldn't make it look right. So after some more sealing with some more Mr.Super clear matte, I used a toothpick to add the sort of white marks to her face. I tried as hard as I could to keep the design symmetrical, and that involved turning her upside down, twisting her head around, doing all kinds of things. Lastly, I glued on some false doll lashes, and then it was time to put her together. So, this is Maka'i. It means tide in Hawaiian, and I thought that was appropriate since she was inspired by the beach. She's a lot different than my original concept sketch, but I like how she turned out in the end. I feel like she still captured the spirit of what I was going for. I know she's missing her hat and her shoes that I sketched out, but after making 2 accessories, honestly, I ran out of time. Which is completely unsurprising. I am a chronic procrastinator, and I hadn't even taken nice outside pictures by the time it was due, and I had to send some sort of picture into Dollightful's Collab. This is the one I ended up submitting to Dollightful's video. You can see it at about the 54-minute, 39-second timestamp. I literally took this inside when I finished the doll. I'm not even sure the face-up was dry yet when I started snapping. So this picture is definitely not the best. These are a little bit better. They're from outside. I hope you like her. A little tropical warmth for this cold January or whenever you watch this video. Please like if you want more doll face-ups, subscribe so you don't miss any updates, and ring that bell. And I will see you all next time. Aloha!